I'm going to go ahead and start sharing.
That's great. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bloomerang Academy. We're so glad to have you here with us today. My name is Margie, and I am going to be hosting Academy today. And we are definitely fortunate to have John Williams with us, who I'm going to introduce here in just a few moments. But let's start by checking out how our chat's working today. If you would, please go ahead and drop where you're joining us from and what the weather is like where you're at today. We would love to see that. Today, it is a sunny 55 degrees in Indianapolis. So it is just lovely weather. John and I were just talking about how it is just getting into that perfect fall weather that we both love. Oh, look at this. Yeah, right. Oh, we've got just lovely weather everywhere today. Oh, a little foggy, it looks like in California. Nice. Well, I'm so glad you're all here today, no matter what the weather is where you are. It's always wonderful in Bloomerang Academy because we get the chance to learn how to utilize our database to its fullest potential. So, oh, hundreds. My goodness, Arizona, there you go. Wonderful.
Holy moly.
I know, right? Woo. Woo. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The session is being recorded, and I want to let you know that at the end you will be getting the recording and the slide deck. So please don't frantically try to take notes. If you're okay with getting those afterwards, you will have that information. So I want to move to the next slide where we're going to talk about our call-in number. This is the number that should you lose audio or if you need audio for translation or any other purposes, you can utilize. So you may want to jot this down. It's 1-669-900-6833. And then a couple of other housekeeping things. We're going to have two different sections where you can interact with us today. So on the next slide, you can see that we're pointing out that we have a Q&A section, and this is specifically for any questions that you have for John or for myself or for Diana Otero, who is on the back end here with us today. So please, if you have a question, pop that in there for us. We'll be happy to answer it. If we can't answer it live by typing it in or answering it through John, then we will definitely get back with you after the session today. So please don't worry, we will answer all questions. The other section that you can interact with is the chat, just like we've been doing, talking about the weather. That's a great place for you to be able to interact with the other people here today. You should be able to share with everyone. So what you put in there will go to everyone. If John is talking about something and maybe you've had some experience with that and you have some best practices you'd like to share, that's a great place to put that so we can all benefit from everyone's knowledge. So that's kind of the difference between those two. So moving to the next slide, I am going to introduce an amazing instructor. We're all really fortunate to have him here with us today. So he is a database coach here at Bloomerang. He graduated from IU, go Hoosiers. He's an ex-English teacher, bread slinger, and just about everything in between. And he has 4 cats. He's not entirely sure how many he's accrued, but he says he is just a John Williams, but we think he's the best John Williams. So John, with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it over to teach us all about reports and filters today.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. That's the second time I've been in the last like half an hour, someone's told me I'm like the John Williams, which is completely new to me, completely foreign, but I appreciate that very much. So let's get diving into this. So today what we're going to be talking about are the reports and filters basics. So we're not going to build out a ton of reports today, but we're going to kind of focus on some of the like ins and outs of things that can trip people up early on when they're starting out with reporting, and just kind of trying to get an idea of how the filtering logic works. Because it is, contrary to some people's beliefs, it is pretty logical, but there are some things that if you're not kind of aware of how a certain filter works or how a column works, it can really get frustrating. So kind of talking through some of those like tips and tricks, if you will, as well. So on the agenda, we're going to start really basic with just how to navigate the reports list. And I'll give you a couple of a couple little tricks with that as well that will unfold while we're going along. And we're going to talk about that filtering logic, as I mentioned above, our and or logic, including, excluding, when to use which type of report, etc. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some more like advanced filtering techniques and some pro tips as well, and pro tips and big quotes. But just some things that I've come across in my time coaching that I know people like get hung up on, or just might not know is an available option for them. So that way we can sort of cover those, so you have that in the back of your mind that you do have some of these options available for you. So I'm going to get out of the slide deck and hop into the database here. Excuse me. And apologies, I might have a little cough and sniffle here and there. It is just turning into fall weather here, and I'm sure you all know what that does to the old allergies and all of that good stuff. So apologies if I'm a little crackly today. So let's start out here. We're starting on the dashboard. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over and hop into the reports section. This nice little pie chart says reports next to it. We click on that, and boom, we're coming into our reports list. Now, anytime you build and save a report, it's going to show up here in this list. And one thing up front that I want to talk about is we get a lot of people asking for some sort of like folders or just some way to keep our reports a little more organized. And I'll show you a trick here when I'm saving these reports that can help, and then show you how that helps after we saved a few. But just to kind of show you some of the things built in that you can do to kind of keep track of which reports are which. The first thing I like to do when I hop into my reports list, and especially if I'm working with somebody in their database, is I almost always come over here to sort alphabetical and change that to sort by date. I know that's pretty basic, but it's a good way to get the reports that you've been working on recently up to the top. So that way, if it's something you run often, you know it's probably going to be up in the top handful, so you're not having to scroll all the way through your list. Aside from that, you also, if I click on the show more filters option, it opens up a set of filters down here. So we have statuses. That's just basically going to be whether it's a scheduled report, which we'll talk about here in a minute as well. The types, that's going to let you choose if you just want to look at your constituent reports, for example. Now I can see here on the right, all of these are constituent reports. And then the last one here is this all users. And my user list is weird because there's 2 of me in here in conversions. But if you have, say you have like 6 users in the database building out reports often, you can filter by users. So if I choose one of those, it's only going to show the reports that this user created. There's also the search option here, which is going to come in handy with the idea of creating folders, if you will. Not actual folders, but we can use keywords. And again, I'll explain that a little more when I save that first report we're going to build out. So those are kind of the basics for just sorting with the default options here for your reporting. We can click reset filters and get that back to just showing everything. The last little thing I want to show you on here before we hop into actually talking about like which types of reports you can build and when to choose which type of report is going to be, just pay attention and know that this little blue button to the right is over here. And that's kind of common throughout Bloomerang. Basically, anytime you see that little arrow pointing down, it means there's something hiding there, which we'll see in filters as well. You can manipulate filters, change them when you see that little arrow. But if I click that little blue drop down, I have options. I could edit, and that's going to open that report up. I could copy it, which is very valuable. That's going to make just a complete copy of the report, all the filters, all the columns. So that's really nice if you have a big gnarly report build out and you just want to tweak a couple things in it. You can make a copy of that original and then tweak to your heart's content, and know you're never going to mess up the original with those. And then there's the export to Excel option. It'll do just that. It's going to give you a spreadsheet, export that out to a spreadsheet, and then deactivate. Deactivating is another nice way to kind of, if you don't want to delete your reports after you've had them built, but you don't need, you're not going to need them, or maybe it's a report you only run at the end of the year or end of fiscal year, you could always deactivate a report. And that just takes it off of our list. And then up at the top, we have our buttons for active and inactive. So if I go over and click on inactive, now I see that report popping back up, the one I just deactivated. And I can always come back over and click that little drop down and activate it to get it back up in my list again. So that's kind of the basics on navigating this page specifically. So let's hop in and start talking a little bit about some decisions you'll have to make when you're building a report. So if I click the new button, that's going to take me over to this first set of options here, whether you're building a report from scratch or you're starting from a template. Now we're going to hop in and look at these templates in just a second, but I would say most reports that people build, you're building from scratch, just because you know specific parameters you want to see. So you're building that from scratch, so you can just have a blank template to start set those parameters up with the filters. But please don't pass on the templates, because if I click in to start from a template, we have some nice templates that are kind of ready to go out of the box for you. So for example, like we have Libunt templates, Scibunt templates, we have newest donor templates. Down here at the bottom, I want to show you these just to make sure you know these exist as well. These came in last year around tax time, and we're getting close to that time again. And this is just our year-end tax report revenue and year-end tax report in kind. So those are nice places to kind of start with if you're looking to start running your year-end tax receipts. We kind of have templates built out to help make that process a much smoother process. So again, don't sleep on the templates, but we're going to focus on building reports from scratch today. Now, when you choose to build a report from scratch, you're going to get these options here, right? So there's 5 types of reports that you can build: constituent, transaction, interaction, notes, and tasks. And so I struggle saying the word tasks, so I'm going to not say that word again today. The most common ones, the ones you're going to use the most, are the constituent and transaction. Unless you're doing a lot of volunteer reporting, that's when you'll start doing a lot of like interaction reports. If you're doing a lot of grant tracking, that's when you'll start doing some note reports, for example, or prospect management would be in notes as well. But day-to-day operations, you're really going to be living in your constituent and transaction reports. And this can really trip people up when they're starting about which type of report to choose. And I don't have like a glass slipper explanation for this that's going to work in every instance. You will absolutely build a report out. Say you choose a transaction report and you're putting in your parameters and not getting the data you think you should be getting. It might have needed to be a constituent report. That will happen to you. The best I can do to kind of explain when to choose constituent versus when to choose transaction is really think about that end goal of the report and whether you're more worried about the people or the gifts. So constituent reports are really good for creating lists of constituents, lists of people. And we can filter within there based off of giving trends. So I can find my people who have given 3 years in a row in a constituent report. I can find my people who are new donors in a constituent report, or people who are lapsing in a constituent report. And those are things I can't do in a transaction report, because a transaction report is looking at each gift as its own individual entity. It's not taking in the whole timeline of the constituents' gifts. It's just when you're filtering for transactions, it's looking at each individual gift. So a lot of your reporting will be done with constituent reporting. Transaction reporting, good if you need the financial details, like which fund campaign appeal gifts we're going to, if you're running pledge reminders, things like that. But a lot of your reporting is going to be done in constituent reporting so that you can pull like lists of people for communications. So let's go ahead and we're going to start off with, we're going to hop in and we're going to build a report out and go through a couple things. And then we're going to take a quick little break for questions and then dive back into some more reporting. So we're going to start here in constituents. So I'm going to click on that. Now, when you start a constituent report, same as when you start a transaction report, it comes preloaded with a set of columns. So right now it's just name, address, and email address that's in there, and no filters at all. So if I have this constituent report with no filters, that's going to just bring in every constituent in the database. Just as if I start a transaction report with no filters at all, that's going to bring in every transaction in the database. So one thing that's really important with constituent reporting is this section up here where it says constituent filters. A lot of constituent reports that I'm going to run, I'm probably going to want to click here on constituent and change that to household. Now, the reason for that is when I do that, when I flip that to household, it is going to then look at anyone in a household as one entity instead of looking at them individually. It's not excluding people not in a household. We still have like Acme here. We still have Alice's Restaurant. We have organizations. We have individuals not in households. But if somebody is in a household, like Philip and Vivian Banks here, it's going to look at them together as one entity instead of separately. Where that comes in very, very handy, and it's a valuable thing to flip that up top to household, is let's use Philip and Vivian here for an example. And let's say I'm running a new donor report, and Vivian's been giving for 6 years in a row. She's one of our best donors, but Philip goes online for the first time and donates. If I'm running a report and I have this set on constituent, if I'm looking for new donors, Philip's going to show up as a new donor because it's looking at him as an individual, not together with Vivian as that one unit. But flipping on household, then that would not consider Philip a new donor because it's looking at the households giving in total. This is also nice for like lapsed donors. You probably don't want to reach out to Philip because Philip hasn't donated this year if Vivian's donated already this year or donated multiple times this year. So a lot of your constituent reporting, you are going to set that to household. Not every time. There are instances where you're going to want to look at just the individual, but it's just a good thing to know that most of the time when you're hopping into a new constituent report, flipping that to household is probably a good idea to start with. So let's build a report. The first one we're going to build is for new donors. It's one of my favorite reports. And we have that first time donor call on the call box on the dashboard. That's going to bring in new donors. But I like having a report for a couple of reasons. One being that they have to have a phone number to show up in that first time donor call box. And I know, like myself personally, I'm a curmudgeon-y old man and I'm not giving people my phone number. So I would probably never show up in that first time donor call box as a new donor because you don't have my phone number. Whereas if I'm building it as a report, then it's going to bring in anyone that's a new donor, regardless of what contact information you have for them. The other reason I like the report is because you can get some more information out of it, like which we'll see here with the columns, but you can just have a nice report. It's good for like year-end review, see all the new donors you got that year, which is what we're going to do here. So what we're going to start with is we have our filter options here. We have the include and the exclude. So if I want to bring in my new donors, I'm going to look for people with this include filter. So I'm going to click that green add filter button. Now I'm going to stop here for just a second because the number of filter options you have can be overwhelming. Any field in Bloomerang, you're going to be able to filter by. Any custom fields that you build, you're going to be able to filter by. So not a bad idea to just kind of scroll through this list and just see what options you have. All that being said, once you get up and going, you might end up only using like 6 filters, and that's totally fine. A lot of these are very like niche information that you might not need to use as filters that often, but still a good idea to kind of go through that list and take a look and see what you have. So I'm going to start this before we add the filter we're going to use with just typing in has, because I want to take a second and talk about these has filters. So these are very valuable filters, and you're looking for people who say like have addresses, have email addresses, have interactions, etc. And all of the ones with the little icon in between has and the next word means that there are nested filters within that. And what I mean by that is there's more options once you set this filter in. So just for example, if I go to has addresses, right now, if I set this filter in, it's going to bring in everybody in the database that has an address on file. But I can look at those little green arrows, or sorry, those little arrows pointing down. And if I click on addresses and change that to specific addresses, which is a common thing you'll see with filters, then that gives me some address filters, and I can come down, excuse me. And if I click add filter here, then I can start filtering by city or state or zip code or something more specific. So those has filters are really valuable. So kind of play around with those a little bit, get comfortable with those. The one we're going to use today, or for this report specifically, and the one that is in my mind probably the most commonly used filter in constituent reporting, is this has transactions. So I'm going to click on that. Now, this is the old English teacher in me, but I really like to encourage people when they're starting out to kind of read the filters like sentences. So we're looking for constituents. We're looking for people. Right now we have this set on has any transactions. So again, if I set this in, it's going to bring in everybody in the database who has a gift, period. Just if they have a transaction on their timeline, they're in your report now. If I click on has any, I have options here that will completely change what this filter is doing. So like if I change has any to has no, and I set that in, now it's pulling everyone who has no gifts. The same as if I change that to like has at least. If I leave a 1 in that box, now I'm looking for one-time donors, people who only have one gift lifetime. So knowing that, and this is not just with this has transactions filter, this is kind of something that's common through a lot of filtering in Bloomerang, is anytime you see that little down arrow, just give it a click and see what your options are, because you typically have some more options other than just what the stock filter is showing. The one we're going to use for this report is the first. So if I choose the first here, now we're looking for new donors. And if you noticed, it changed all transactions to specific transactions automatically, because we need to set some sort of parameters of what constitutes a new donor. Otherwise, we're just looking for one-time donors again, and that donation might have been in 2002, and that's not really a new donor at this point. So we're saying the first transaction is a specific transaction, and then we can add our parameters down here. So the most common one is if I add a filter here in the include section, I'm just going to search for it here, but the most common one is date. So if I add a date filter in, now I can tell it like what time frame I need their gift to be in for them to be considered a new donor. So to start with, I like to click last week here and come down and change that to this year. So that way we're just sort of looking at any new donor that came through this year. So let's go ahead and click OK until OK goes away. Also note that if you're trying to set in a filter and you see that cancel and OK button, that means your filter is not set in yet. So your results aren't going to be reflected. And if you try to save now, it's not going to save with that filter. So I always like to say, click OK until OK goes away. It's gone, that filter's in. So now I have my 4 new donors for this year. Now from there, just to show you a couple things you can do with the columns here. I personally, if I don't need that contact information in this report, that's kind of the first thing I get rid of. So I might come through and click on these columns anywhere in that blue box and click delete. Just click in the column, click delete. And I just cleaning up the noise a little bit, right? Getting rid of that contact information, and we'll replace it with some more, what might be more valuable metrics. So now I just have their names in there, and I can come over and click this little add column button. So when you're building reports, the filters at the top are kind of like the who, not the band, but determining who is pulled into your report. So the filters at the top are determining who's getting pulled into your report. The columns are the what. The columns are going to say what data that you're actually going to see about these individuals you're pulling into the report. So if I click add column, again, the same idea with reports or with the filters. Scroll through these, take a look, see what you have, because some of these you might not know even exist. So I, for this, love adding in that first transaction date and amount, and I can just check those. And then I'm going to keep scrolling down a bit. I know what I'm looking for, but again, you might not. So just keep scroll down that list, take a look. For a new donor report, I also like adding in their second transaction date and amount, just to kind of get an idea of if I've got them back for that all important second gift yet. Spoiler alert, I don't think I have with any of these people because none of them are real. So probably don't have a second gift for any of these, but just to show you those columns exist. And then for a new donor report, and this really doesn't have much to do with reporting, but just to give you that idea, maybe not a bad idea to add in a column for that generosity as well. You might not know these individuals very well. They're coming in. Oh, and I did get a second transaction. How about that? But you might not know these people very well. So getting that generosity score in for a new donor report can be pretty nice. So that way you have an idea of whether they're in that cooled or cool group, or maybe you got a new person in that's on fire. and that might be someone to kind of target. But just to know that the filters at the top are determining who's pulled in the report, those columns, that's going to tell what data you're actually seeing in the report. Now, one thing before we move on, I'm going to click into this filter here. This has a specific transaction filter, and I'm going to change this date range up to say date is during. Click on this year, and we're going to go with last week if I can find it. There we are. So date is during last week. And I think I have somebody. Let's hope. I got one. That's all we need. We just need one. So a good thing to think about with this is maybe I leave all of that contact information in and still add that first transaction date and amount column. But now I'm pulling in just new donors from last week. So if I go in, I'm going to give this a name so I can save it just in the details tab. So this is where I'm going to put that BL for Bloomerang in the front of it with a space. And I'll show you why after we get a couple saved, why that's nice on your reports list. And we're just going to call it new donors last week. So from there, the save and button at the top, that's how you save your report. But just clicking it doesn't save it. You have options underneath. So we have these 4 options here. If I just keep editing, that's just like clicking the little floppy disk icon on a Word document. It's going to save it, but you're still working on it. It doesn't take you anywhere else. Export to Excel, again, will do just that. We're going to talk about this one in a second. Go to reports list is going to take me back to my list of reports. So that would be like, I'm done working on this report. Save and go to reports list, and you're back at the home. Now, schedule report. This is a very valuable tool. So if I click on schedule report, it's going to pop up this box. And here I can choose the frequency. So what's going to happen with this is I can schedule reports to be emailed to certain people on a regular basis. So I'm filtering, I'm looking for all my new donors from last week, right? So if I'm looking for new donors from last week, I'm going to schedule this to go out weekly. If I were looking for new donors from last month, I would probably schedule it to go out monthly. And I always recommend setting that time frame to be kind of the time frame prior to when you're scheduling it. So if I'm sending it out weekly, I want to send it out last week, so I know from last week's data, so I know I'm not missing anybody. And then here I could say Monday, select a time. We could be jerks about it and send it out at 4:30 in the morning. And then down here, your recipients. This is kind of another one of the important parts I want to talk about on this real quick. Is if I click in that box, it's just the users in my database. So I could click on that and it's going to go to that specific user. But I can also type in any email address I want. And this isn't a great example because that's the email address there. But I can type in email addresses and it will send to them. So maybe you have like a super charismatic board member and you want them to be reaching out to new donors as they come in. You can schedule this report to go out to them weekly, monthly, to have an idea of who those new donors are and who they need to reach out to. Just so you know, this option here, if I have that checked, it's going to yell at me here because this isn't a user. So if I'm requiring a Bloomerang login to view reports, then I can only send this to my users. But if that's not selected, then I can send it to anyone I need to. Cool, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and save and go back to the reports list. And real quick before we stop for questions, I'm going to show you why I like having that little like BL in front of reports or like your initials or a keyword or something, is because that's how I can kind of create folders. So if I'm sorting alphabetically, if I scroll down, everything that starts with BL is going to be grouped together with that BL, which we'll see once we get some more in here. But it's also nice because I can come up to search reports, type in BL, and there's my report. So if you do, again, if you want to create folders, that's kind of a workaround to do it, is use like keywords, initials at the beginning, and you can just sort of search for that and it'll pull up just the ones with that keyword or initial at the beginning. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water, see if we have any good questions to go from, and then we'll hop back into some more reporting.
Hi, John. So we do have a couple of questions. The first one's from Becky, and she wants to know, so for each report, do I need to select deceased? And where is that in the report?
I wouldn't say that for each report you need to. It really it kind of depends on what you're using the report for. If it's for something that's like solicitation, then yeah, probably you would want to add that filter in to remove anyone that's deceased from the results. That is so down here. I'm just going to use, this isn't going to get any results here, but I'm just going to use this report we just built. If I come down to the exclude section, I can add a filter there. And the field for that is status. So if I add a column for status, or sorry, a filter for status, I can says status is any, and I can click in that box and choose deceased. Click OK until OK goes away. And again, we just had the one in there, so it's not removing anyone. But that would be your filter to kind of exclude that. It's really, I wouldn't say you need to do it on every report, but probably if it's more of something you're building out for a solicitation list, some sort of communications, then that would be when that filter really starts to come into play a little more. And one quick kind of tip on that, of just because you mentioned like what that filter was, what field that was, a good thing to think of as well is if I go to this person's profile and I look here and I see where the status is, so where it's saying active and that field name is status, that's a good way to kind of figure out what filter you need to add. Because again, it might be better if I edit just so you can see it a little better. But that status field there is where active, inactive, and deceased live. So that's why when I'm filtering, I want to add that filter for status, because that's what's going to give me those options.
Great, thank you, John.
Yeah.
We do have a couple of other questions. Sharon is asking, how can I remove the constituents account number from a report made? It's not a selected column, but it exports in my report.
Yeah, you just delete it out of Excel. Delete that column out of Excel. Every report that you export from Bloomerang is going to add that column in automatically. And it's mostly for the purpose of if you're wanting to export like a list of constituents, update names or something, and import it back in, that account number is an automatic match when you're importing. So anytime you export a report from Excel, or from Bloomerang to Excel, it's going to add that account number column in. So if you don't want it, you just delete that column out of Excel real quick.
Great, thank you, John. Sarah is asking, when you say last week, what does that mean? Is that Sunday through Saturday?
Oh, that trips me up all the time. I believe it's Sunday through Saturday.
Yes, I think I'm getting confirmation from Diana.
Okay, good,
So
good,
you are
good,
correct.
good. Yeah. No, that I have to stop and think about that every time somebody asks me that question. It never sticks with me, but yeah, I believe it is, and just got confirmation Sunday through Saturday.
Excellent. And then how do I rename an existing report to create a group?
Oh, so with that, if I'm back on my reports list, and this is going to be like, there's no like super quick, easy, or well, it's easy, but no super quick way to do that. You basically would just come in and click on a report to open it, and then go to the details tab up here at the top, and then change the name. So again, one of those things I like to say, it's not hard, but could be tedious. Because once I save that, now that report is going to be changed to that with the BL. And if I scroll down, I can see that went down into that little group. But yeah, no, there's no way to like kind of just do it real quickly. You have to open the report, details tab, change the name, save it, and there it is.
Cool, thank you. A couple more questions. Amy is wondering, is it possible to build a report that shows major donors who do not open their mass emails from us? We'd like to be able to single out these folks and revert to USPS mail or personal calls.
Yes, but that's going to be way above what we're doing today. It absolutely is possible. So you can filter for, just like we did with has transactions, you can filter with has interactions. And just real quick to show you that filter of the has interactions, it's the same idea as the has transactions. So has interactions, change that to specific interactions, and then you can come down here and start filtering for things like channels. So maybe where channel is mass email, And then we have, so like our is opened option there. So we could say is opened and change that to is not opened. So again, that is something that's possible. It's just, that would probably take up the rest of our time building that report out today.
All right.
I would recommend, if like maybe after this the session's over, chat our lovely support team and they could definitely help you get that built out. It's a possibility. It's just pretty intensive.
All right, great. Do you have time for a couple more questions, Sean, before we move on?
Let's go ahead and move on, and then
Yep.
we can have another little break to ask for questions, but get through a little bit more.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the questions. Really good questions. Cool. So we're gonna do another constituent report here to kind of talk a little bit about the include exclude logic and kind of where that comes into play. So we're going to build what is basically a lapsed donor report, a live month report, but a little bit different. So just to kind of show you some of the options. So we have that live month template, which is a great place to start with that. So what we're going to do with this is build it more with the idea of people who are close to lapsing. All right. So again, constituent report, I'm going to change constituent to household here. And then we're going to start in the include section. So when I'm building out list of people, I always like to, I call it casting my big net first. So I start in the include section of the filters to kind of bring in my big group of people. And then I use exclude filters to kind of whittle that number down or whittle some people out to get to the results I'm looking for. So I'm going to start here with this include filter. And we're going to go back to that tried and true has transactions. Now, I'm going to leave that on has any, but I'm going to change transactions to specific transactions. From there, I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a date filter. So date. Now, I'm looking for people who are about to lapse. So in my mind, the end goal of this report is I want to get it narrowed down to where I'm finding people who are about a month away from lapsing. And we're going to end up with like a 35-day window, but they're about a month away from lapsing. So the first thing I want to do is leave that on during. If I change that to between, I can set in a hard date range, more of a static date range that stays the same every time you open this report. The during date options are dynamic, so they roll with you. So last week is always last week, always that Sunday to Saturday. Maybe if I say Sunday to Saturday enough, it'll finally stick. But I'm going to click on last week because we have these options, this option here for previous number of days, which I like to use a lot. And I think a lot of people kind of miss it. So I'm going to say during the previous number of days is 365. So we're basically looking at during the last rolling year, instead of, if I set that on during this year, it would be calendar year. Or if I set it on this fiscal year, if my fiscal year starts in July, that would be our starting date. Whereas if I leave that, say previous number is 365, it's more of like a rolling year. So if I open this report up in 2 weeks, it's going to be looking at kind of a different time range than it is today. So it keeps rolling with you. That's mainly why I like using that previous number of days filter when I can. So let's set that in. And now I have 17. I'm not doing great at the Museum of Awesomeness over here, but I have 17 people who donated within the last 365 days. So I want to now limit this to where I'm only seeing those people who are about to lapse. So I'm going to come down into my exclude filter, add a filter there. We're going to use that has transactions filter again. I'm not joking when I say this is the filter. Like if you take anything away from this session today, learn to love that has transactions filter. Change transactions to specific again. Now, here's another like little thing that trips people up all the time. I am excluding. So I started with that blue add filter button there. My mouse is circling around. I need to, though, add the parameters I'm excluding based off of in the include section down here. Otherwise, it creates a double negative. So that might be a good way to think about it. If I'm excluding, starting with the exclude, and then I change this to specific, I'm telling it what parameters I'm excluding based off of. So I need to build that here in the include section. So we're going to add a filter there. We're going to say date again. We're basically building out the same filter we did above, changing last week to previous number of days. But now if I set that to 330 instead of 365, I'm basically going to be finding people whose last gift they made is in that like 35-day window from lapsing. So we started by pulling in everyone who gave in the last 365. Now we're excluding anyone if their gift was in the last 330 days. So what we'll be left with are people whose last gift was in the end of September or sometime in October of last year. So if I set that in, okay, until okay goes away, I have my two folks here. So I also like adding columns to check and make sure my filters are doing what my filters should be doing. So I'm going to add a column over here for latest transaction date. And obviously you could add amount, you could add lifetime revenue, lots of things you could add in here, but for our purposes, we're just going to add that latest transaction date and hope it's not making me a liar. Perfect. So the two people we have here, their last transaction, this one was October 9th of last year, October 17th of last year. So it's kind of a good way of finding those people who are going to lapse soon, maybe get ahead of it before they do officially go that full year without donating. But just really to drive home that idea of the include and exclude logic. When I'm building a big report, start with my big net first in the include section, pull in that like big group. So if I was doing a straight live bunt report, I would say, has any specific transactions, date is last year, to pull in everyone who gave last year. And then I would exclude anyone who gave this year. So that way I'm pulling the people who have given again this year out, and I'm left with just those who gave last year, but not this year. So we're going to go into the details and just give this one a name real fast so we can save it. And then we're going to look a little bit at some transaction reporting. So save and go to reports list. We're going to go new again. We're going to build from scratch. And now we're going to go to transactions. All right. Just like with the constituent reports, if we have no filters, this is all transactions ever. So we're going to start narrowing that down. I'm going to build a pretty basic report here because there's one thing specifically in transaction reports that can give people absolute headaches. And it's an easy fix. It's just something you have to be conscious of, especially if you have pledges in the database. It's really, really a thing if you have pledges in the database. So under my transaction filters, I'm just going to add in a date filter. And I'm just going to say date is during this year and pull in all of my gifts from this year. Perfect. So now I have all of my gifts from this year. My amount column is wrong, and I'll show you why. And this again is where something that can like really trip people up, but I want to show you kind of there's two ways to not have this issue. So the first thing I'm going to do is also show you how to group by columns, because especially in transaction reports, that can be very valuable. So for example, real fast, if I click on that campaign column, I can then choose that group by this column option and click OK. And that just puts all of my gifts together by the campaign. And I have some in here, you know, with obviously 2016 capital campaign. My data is fake, so those aren't actually 26, but just so there's some differentiation here. But the nice thing about this is I can kind of see my total at the top, but then I can see subtotals for each specific campaign. So this is a thing to know of. You might not need to build a separate report for each campaign you're running or each appeal or each fund. You could absolutely have sort of one report running, encapsulating that time frame, and then group by that fund column, that campaign column, that appeal column, and get one report with all of your data, but sort of broken into little groups based off of that fund, campaign, or appeal. Another thing, just to show you this real quick, if I click back into that campaign column and I check this collapse group to one row option, that then is going to only put one row for each campaign. And it's going to give me the total for each campaign. So do know that at this point, if you're collapsing to one row, like that date column, that name column, probably the type and the fund, and basically everything except for the amount are kind of pointless at this stage, because the reason Colt Cabana is showing up here is because his name was at the top when we collapsed, and that's it. But the amount will total in those collapsed rows. So let's remove this grouping. And we're going to click on the name column, and we're going to group by that column instead. So I'm going to drag this amount column back up to the front so it's easy to see. And you can do that just by clicking and holding on it. And then when you drag over, it's kind of finicky. But if you notice, when I'm dragging, my mouse icon is the null sign right now. Once it gets over to a place you can drop it, it turns back into the arrow with the box, and you'll see that column above it kind of jump to the right. So I want to put my amount column there, and I want to put my type column over here. Now, why is my amount column wrong? You may be asking. The reason is recurring donations and pledges. So let me get down here. We're looking at this type column so we can kind of see what type. So donation, 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 those are fine. If I get down here to this recurring donation payment and this recurring donation schedule, they're both showing 15 for a total of 30, but that's not right. I only got $15 from this because the schedule, you're not actually getting money from the schedule. That's just the item that gets created to allow that schedule to keep going. It's what kind of determines how much those payments are going to be, what fund campaign appeal those payments are going to be to. So right now it's double dipping on that. It's showing 15 and 15. The same if I scroll down a little bit more and find a pledge. So here with this pledge, I have a $1,000 pledge and a $250 pledge payment. It's totaling to $1,250. I did not get $1,250, right? I so far have got $250 in the door and a $1,000 promise. So how to kind of alleviate this, there's two options. And it really depends on if you want to say, like, leave the pledge in, for example, or leave the schedule in. But if I click my add column button here, I'm going to search for amount. And then I'm going to scroll down here and choose raised amount and revenue amount and add those two columns. And then I'm going to drag these back up next to that amount column so it's a little easier to see the difference. So we can see right away from our totals that all three of these numbers are different, right? So if I scroll down and let's find those instances again, if I'm looking at a straight donation, you don't have to worry about those. Those are fine in this situation. They're going to show up in the amount column as they should, raised in revenue, all of that's good. Our numbers are fine. If I come down here, say to this recurring donation, the schedule and the payment. So now in my raised amount column, I can see that that recurring donation schedule does not count towards the raised in revenue amount. The amount column doesn't discriminate. It just, if there's a number there, it's going to add it in. But your raised in revenue actually looks at those specific things separately, the raised in revenue amount. The same as if I scroll down to my pledge, I can see here that the pledge itself is showing up in the raised amount, whereas the pledge payment is showing up in revenue amount. So where the two column option is kind of option one of replacing that amount column with a raised in revenue amount column. And that's nice if you want to leave that pledge in so you kind of know what you're expecting. So I can see here, I got $1,000 raised. That's the promise from the pledge. I have $250 that's come in so far. So I know I can expect another $750 coming in from this. Your other option, if I scroll back up here to my filters, is I'm going to click this and button. And in transaction reporting, one of your most powerful filters is the type filter. So I'm going to come down here and choose just plain type. And then I'm going to click in this box here and choose donation, pledge payment, recurring donation payment. Those are the 3 revenue types of transactions. So if I set that in, now my amount column is the same as my revenue amount column. Okay. My raised is still off a little bit, but that's fine, because if we're looking for just the revenue types of transactions, then we wouldn't be adding in that raised column. If I'm adding that type filter, then I'm just leaving in my amount column, and my amount column's fine. If I'm not adding in that type filter, that's when I might want to add in a column for raised and revenue amount so I can see the differences. And this is also a good place to talk about the and or logic. So again, read them like sentences. I'm looking for transactions that happened this year, and they are donations, pledge payments, or recurring donation payments. So if I'm clicking and to add my next filter, these filters are working together, so in conjunction with each other. If I were to drag this filter down, and let's take a look here. Right now we have 44 transactions. If I drag this filter down to the or section, we're going to have a lot more, because now so now we're at 1,253. So a lot more, right? So what this is doing is it's saying I'm looking for transactions that happened this year, or transactions that are donations, pledge payments, or recurring donation payments. So these 2 filters are no longer working together, they're working independently. So that's that and or logic, right? So again, if I put this back up to and, now both of these have to be true for that transaction to show up in the report. All right, let's stop here for questions if we can, if we have a few. And then when we wrap up, I want to show you one last like super fun trick that can really be a game changer.
Yeah, thanks, John. This has been great. We actually don't have any active questions right now. So if you want to just keep going, I think everybody's just intently listening.
Game changer time. Perfect. All right. So this is one of my favorite things you can do with reports, and it's called referencing a report. And this is, again, this is kind of more of like a high level thing, but especially for communications, it can be an absolute game changer, So I'm going to come here and I'm going to search for BL just to see the reports we built already today. So let's look at one of our constituent reports, and I'm going to say this new donors last week. I'm going to open that up real fast just for our purposes here. This isn't what we're working on. I just want to change this to datas this year to kind of open that back up and get some more folks in here. So data's during this year. 4, okay, so that wasn't nearly as exciting as I thought it was going to be. We went from like 1 to 4, but anywho, so we have 4 people. Just say that again, says new donors last week, but we're pulling for last year. So let's say I'm looking at that and I want to see with those new donors, if I open this report back up, I can see how much, like when their first transaction was, how much that first transaction was, but that's about where it stops as far as the transaction details. So I'm not going to get like the fun campaign appeal they donated to. So if I want to see that, one thing I can do is if we start a new report from scratch, I want to see the transaction details for those new donors. So I'm going to start with the transaction report. Now, if I click add filter in the include section, we have a filter that is in a blank report. Okay, so we have is in a transaction report, is in a constituent report, interaction report, etc. And what that lets you do is reference a report in another report, or in an email, or in a letter, and it pulls in just the people that are in that original report. So that report we were just looking at was a constituent report. So if I click on this now, is in a transaction report, and I click on my select a report, I'm going to type in my BL to get just those reports up. That's the only one showing up. I'm not seeing my new donor report because the new donor report is a constituent report. So if I'm seeing that, if I'm trying to add this filter and I know I need to reference a constituent report, but I'm seeing a transaction report, that's when, instead of starting with that is in a blank report filter, we need to come down here and click on constituent first. So if you notice, I'm in a transaction report. I have transaction filters, tells me here too, transaction. Once I click on constituent, now I have constituent filters. So if I click add filter here and I type in is in a blank report, now I have constituent report. So if I click on that, click on select a report. Now if I type in my BL, I have my new donor report. So I can click on that. Once it's green, you're good to go. You have this option here to copy the filters. I normally recommend just clicking OK, because then it links the two together. And if you make changes to the original report, those will be reflected in the report you're referencing in as well. So if I click OK, OK, I have 5 transactions, but just those 4 people that were in my new donor report. So that way I can kind of see what fund, campaign, appeal they were donating to, etc. So referencing reports can be really nice for that. It's also good. Let's say you're building out like a big solicitation list and you're just going to send a mass like cold call solicitation, for lack of a better phrase. Maybe you want to exclude all of your major donors from that list. So if you have a report built capturing all your major donors in your big solicitation list, you can add an exclude filter for is in a constituent report and exclude that specific group of people so they're not in that solicitation list. And that way you don't have to build out a ton of new filters. You already have that major donor report built. You have your solicitation report built. Just reference that major donor one in your exclude section, and now they're falling off of that big list. The other thing that's really nice with this is if I say go into an email, and I'm just going to choose one of my nonsense ones here because we're just worried about the filter. If I go to the filter up here, I can say add a filter in the include section, is in a blank report, choose my constituent report option. Select a report, type in my BL to find the ones we've been working on, choose that new donor report. Okay until okay goes away. And now I have my 4 people who are in that report in my email template, so I can go ahead and send that email out to them. So you might have done some like cool things with filters to get a nice list of people. You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel in the filters for your email. So you can just reference that report from one to the other and send that out to, and just know you're pulling in that specific group of people. So that's kind of my game changer, if you will. That's my big Hail Mary home run. What other mixed metaphors, sports things, my hat trick, my half court shot, whatever you want to say. But referencing reports can be just a really, really, really nice thing. All right, and I think we only have a couple minutes left. Do we have any questions come in, or?
Question asked that out loud.
Oh, so we do have a question, and it's can we use this the reference report feature for letters as well as emails?
100%. Same idea. You just go to the filter section of your letter and add it and reference it in letters, emails, other reports. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, John, I just have to tell you that Amy said that this is absolutely fantastic, in that you're right. It's a game changer. And she wants to give you like thanks for that. So see, I told you guys he is the John Williams, and this is why we say that. So
yeah, that's like I said, it's hard to know. Like that's why I threw all those random sports metaphors out at the end, because normally when I'm showing people that, I get to see their eyes light up and they're like, oh my goodness, that's so fun. But kind of talking to it like into nothingness today. So thank you very much for that feedback. Makes my day.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And if you do have more questions or things that you need addressed, don't forget, you can always go into your database, the dashboard, go up to that question mark. There's help and tutorials. We have all kinds of ways to get assistance. So please take advantage of that, because that's we have an amazing customer support team that we're always happy to be able to help you out with any questions you have. And John, thank you again for being here with us today and sharing all this great information. And thank you all for being with us too. We really appreciate you taking time to learn a little bit more about how to serve your mission better. And thank you for all the work that you do in your communities. Keep an eye out on the website, and we'll be sharing with you some more classes that are coming up. So John, take care, and everyone else have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.